Good afternoon. My name is Steve Hernandez, and I am the Executive Director of the Legislature's Nonpartisan Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity. We are here today to host the 2022 Lunar New Year Cultural Celebration and Conversation. I'm so excited to be having today's conversation right past this year's Lunar New Year celebration, which was celebrated from February 1st to February 15th. We're going to be hearing from several panelists today, members of community who will be sharing not only their own stories and lived experience, but also sharing together the possibilities of the state and how it is that we ensure that each of us, our voices are heard, that we are seen, and that we remain vibrant participants in the future of the state of Connecticut. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you. I'm gonna introduce you. I'm gonna say your name so that you can introduce yourselves, because by the power of Zoom, when you speak, your face comes forward, which I think is it's a magical affect of Zoom. So firstly, I'm going to recognize you as I see you for the purpose of introductions, and I see first Dr. Henan Cheng. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you again, everybody, and for especially for the commission to organize this exciting event and invite me to participate. So here's my brief introduction. My name is Henan Chung, and I'm a Deputy Director of the Center on Chinese Education at Teachers College, Columbia University. I work in New York, but I live in New Haven. I've been living in New Haven for almost 18 years. I'm a proud resident of Connecticut. That's why I'm so excited to share my experience, my story, and also sharing my insights, observation as an educator in particular. Thank you. Really look forward to this event.
Thank you, Dr. Chung. It's wonderful to have you. Next, we have Sylvia Ho. Hi, Sylvia.
Hi, Steve. I'm Sylvia Ho, and it's great to see everyone. I'm an attorney. I am a small business attorney in Farmington. I previously served on the Asian Pacific American Commission for the legislature. I'm really happy to be back and to participate, I think, at a very, very important time in American history. And I represent a lot of small business owners, and I'm also a big volunteer. I am a pro bono attorney, and I do have pro bono clients that have been Chinese American because I'm bilingual, and I'm looking forward to the discussion about our times and this upcoming year. Very excited. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sylvia. Wonderful to see you. Megan Baker.
Hello, my name is Megan Baker. I am the lead Asian American Pacific Islander policy analyst here for the Commission. And I just want to thank everyone again for being able to participate and join in the conversation. I'm excited on learning and listening and sharing in the cultural celebration.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you for your stewardship in the preparation of today's conversation. Representative Kim Fiorello.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be here. 안녕하세요. 제 이름은 송민경입니다. That's for anyone in the audience who's Korean. And I am State Representative Kimberly Fiorello. I represent parts of Greenwich and Stamford. I was born in Seoul. I came to the United States when I was 10 years old. I grew up mostly in Virginia. I did have a chance to wear the U.S. Army uniform while I was a cadet at the military academy. And I was one of very few Asian cadets there. And I'm one of very few Asian representatives in the Connecticut General Assembly, and grateful for this conversation. Thank you.
Representative Fiorello, it's so nice to see you. One of our first opportunities to work together, but the beginning of many, I'm sure. Good, very good to see you, Representative.
Thank you.
Next, we have Melinda Liu. Hi, Melinda.
Hi, everybody. My name is Melinda, and I'm currently a junior at AMI Regional High School in Woodbridge. And my friend who couldn't be here today, but her name is Ming. And we have been working together with Dr. Chung and JHD and creating a platform for students at our school to voice their opinions on Asian American education.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Melinda. Great to see you. Mike Keogh. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Stephen. Hi, all. My name is Mike Keogh. I am a father of 2 young boys. I am a wedding photographer, and I founded the I'm Not a Virus campaign. I grew up as the eldest son to Cambodian refugees in West Hartford, and I recently moved back a few years ago to start my own family here. So I'm grateful to be here, excited to be speaking with everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Mike is very modest. He, to me, is an inspiration, a dear friend. Good to see you, Mike. Next, we have Jenny Haikala Diaz. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, I'm Jenny Hakila Diaz, or I also go by JHD. I use she and they pronouns. I was born and raised in Los Angeles and have lived in New Haven for about 15 years now. I'm a parent and an educator. My work is at New Haven Promise. I'm the Chief of Talent and Operations, and I'm also a co-founder of AAPI New Haven and the activist in residence at UConn's Asian and Asian American Studies Institute. And I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Jenny. Good to see you. We also have joining us, if you'll notice, we have Werner Ollanadel, my colleague here on the staff, and Alan Tan, our chair. They will be joining in, interjecting, and be otherwise omniscient presences in the conversation as we move forward. And last but certainly not least, and I wanted to introduce you last, Jason, because you will be presenting a modest keynote today. Next, we have Jason Chang. Welcome, Jason.
Stephen, thank you so much, everyone, for coming together for this panel. It's a wonderful way for us to see each other, tell our stories. We don't often hear from each other in this way, so this is a wonderful platform. I'm an associate professor of history and Asian American studies at UConn. I direct the institute there, the Asian American Studies Institute, which does a number of public-facing work, recently most focused on education. I also sit on the Board of Education in West Hartford. That's allowed me to see at the ground level how cultural programs, education change can really impact communities. So really seeing these as important conversations that we want to see all over the state. So thanks again for generating this opportunity for us.
Thank you, Jason. And Jason, you are going to start us off with a conversation, a framing of today's conversation. So welcome again, Jason.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So I'm going to start off by saying that when I grew up celebrating Lunar New Year, my parents didn't explain a lot to me about what it meant, or some of the reasons why we received envelopes with money in it, or why we had red lanterns all over the house, or why we had special suppers. But they were just a part of how we lived. I grew up as a mixed race, person in Indiana. There weren't too many other Asian folks out there, but my dad came from Hawaii, where it's a very different kind of Asian America, one that really celebrates a kind of pan-ethnic, pan-cultural kind of celebration. So sometimes being able to celebrate Lunar New Year in Hawaii was really different than celebrating Lunar New Year in Indiana, and so I have both of those kinds of experiences, and it's only until recently that I began to understand and learn about the reasons why some of these practices exist. So I thought, this might be an interesting opportunity for us to take a look back into Connecticut's past, right? To see when was the first mention of celebrating Lunar New Year in Connecticut. Anyone want to guess? You can just throw it in the chat there. Anyone want to guess when the first mention of celebrating Lunar New Year was in Connecticut newspapers? Well, I'll give it away. It's 1943. 1943 was the first mention, and I want to show you the article here. So this is what it looks like. All right, so this is a brief description of the celebration of the Chinese community in Hartford, that as celebrating a Lunar New Year and describing the festivities, describing the reasons for their celebration, and connecting it to China and immigrant communities. This is a time of a very tumultuous period during World War II, right? So we see 1943 is a very important date because that also marks the period at which the US is beginning to unravel its racist immigration laws against Asian Americans, right? So this is the beginning for the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Acts, which began in 1882, right? So this is at a moment at which the United States is mobilizing to forge an allyship with China, that the celebration of Lunar New Year becomes a significant cultural referent in the newspapers, and that's what generates this attention in 1943, right? So this is an indication of the presence and the practice of this, but also the context. How are these communities elevated in Connecticut's cultural space, right? So the next big occurrence, the next time that Lunar New Year becomes really significant in Connecticut's news is in 1996. And this is when we see the formation of a Vietnamese refugee community in Connecticut. And I'm going to share this image with you. And this shows us that this celebration of Lunar New Year from a different national culture, a different cultural experience, really demonstrates the strength of this community coming from displacement during the Vietnam War, right? And finding fertile ground in Connecticut and establishing new communities here. And to many, this celebration 1996 was a kind of identification of how far the community has come. Many of these folks 20 years after arriving first in the United States in 1976, right? So it's events and kind of community identities like this that mobilize support and demonstrate the value of these cultural practices. The third, and this is my last point, is I have never seen so many references in social media and in the media about Lunar New Year as this past Lunar New Year, right? And so what's special about now, right? And I think now we're going on several years now with the rise of the pandemic and the parallel rise in anti-Asian racism, that has also spurned a new generation of Asian Americans who are thinking about their place in the United States, and there is an awakening. Asian Americans have stepped into a new cultural space in this moment, and one of the things I take away from the legacy of the Red Lantern is that this is a celebration of scaring away the fear and the past, right? And being able to start anew and being able to reconcile with the past in a way that creates fortune and good opportunities for everyone. And that's what I see in these recent Lunar New Year celebrations. A very hopeful but concerted attention to these traditions, and that they are relevant to pushing us forward today.
Jason, thank you so much for your framing and for the beautiful recollection of the history of the story being told in Connecticut of the unfolding of community as it is, not only as it exists in the state, but as the story is told. And it strikes me that there there's always different levels of storytelling that are happening at the same time. The stories that are told about us, the stories that we tell about ourselves publicly, and then of course the stories that we share among each other privately. And that chorus and that harmony between those stories is ever evolving. And so that's really where I'd like to go next with our reflective panelists. I would love for each of you, if you would, as you are comfortable, reflect on some of what Jason framed for us, which is the story of the Lunar New Year and how it may be relevant to you, but also the story that it says about us as a state moving forward. If you'd like to, we can use the hand raise function, or I can call on you, whatever makes you feel most comfortable. Go ahead, Mike. I see you've raised your hand.
Hearing Jason talk about this, it reminds me of my own Lunar New Year's at my house. My family's Cambodian Chinese. I identify more as Cambodian because our Chinese side would only come out during Lunar New Year's. My grandma spoke 5 languages, but not English. And, you know, she never talked about her 2 sons that were killed in the war. There were 2 sons that were killed, and she had 4 surviving children. And these parts of our history were never talked about, you know? And I remember during Lunar New Year's when she would light incense, she would call the dead, and that's what we do in my house. So it was really hard to find a book that was about food and family because everything was about lion dances, right? And so she would call the dead, and this is the only time I would hear her call her sons' names to come and enjoy this feast with the rest of the family, you know? And this is how I got to know my uncles, was through Lunar New Year's. They died before I was born. I was born in Rhode Island, came to Connecticut at 1. And so, you know, this is when we finally found these photos. These were the first photos that went up on the altar, were of our deceased. When my grandma passed away, one new picture that we added to the altar was my grandmother and my grandfather. My aunt came, and when she came, she was married in Cambodia back in the 60s, 1969. And she brought with her a roll of film. And in this roll of film, they discovered it in the attic after my grandma passed away because we were looking for old photos to scan. And I developed this medium format film. And on this one image of a 4x6 negative, there's a picture in this far corner of my grandfather, who I've never seen before. I just heard he was tall and I didn't get his genes because I'm 5'6". And so we discovered this photo and I scanned it. And I remember at this funeral giving it to each of my aunts, uncles, and my mom, and how my uncle would just cry because he forgot what his father looked like, you know? And so when I think about Lunar New Year's, I reflect on these memories that are a part of the community, right? And a part of my community anyways, where there are so many things hidden, but we only talk about it through rituals, where there is space for us to breathe and for us to not feel as burdened by this sense of loss.
Thank you, Mike. I love that connection, the connection to the ancestors and that space where ancestry and your ancestors are evoked into the space by the spoken word, which is so powerful. Jenny, your reflections.
Well, nowadays, Lunar New Year is kind of a sad time for me because growing up, it was my favorite holiday. We would get together with my mom's family immigrated here from Korea, and we would get together, my aunts and uncles, so her sisters and brothers, my grandparents, and then my cousins and my brother and me. And we would do the bowing ceremony. We would get the envelopes. We'd have the awesome like spread of food. And those are just, now that we, especially during the pandemic, but now that we live so far away, it's just been hard to keep up that tradition and keep up that favorite holiday in the same way that I experienced it in the past. And so it's actually kind of a sad time for me. And I guess one way that I've tried to get more of what I experienced as a child and make sure that my children also have that experience is we celebrate January 1st, and then we also celebrate Lunar New Year. And then we try to sort of get in as many of the elements that I enjoyed growing up mixed in there across those 2 New Years as possible. So for me, it's a sad time.
Thank you, Jenny. that really does, I'm sure that resonates with a lot of our viewers, not only because of the last 2 years, but also because what the passage of time means, both for tradition and for family. And so interwoven to the experience of the passage of time is that loss, but also remembrance. And I love the way in which you are balancing the two, especially as the gift to the next generation of your children. So thank you for sharing that, Jenny. Dr. Chung.
Thank all the panelists, especially Jason, Mike, for sharing powerful personal stories that really resonate with me a lot. Especially, I like, Steve, you mentioned about this is time we celebrate, but also this is time we teach. So Jason, just to give us the historical stories, the experience, just make me think about, Connecticut is really probably the perfect place for us to make that connection because, coming from the Chinese background, we all know that there's this special historical tie between China and Connecticut in particular. If we think about Ron Wen, he's a resident of West Hartford, right? Was it Avon, right? That's a town he lived. And also he's a very prominent, famous Chinese educator that promote this educational exchange, between, started in Qing Dynasty. So when he helped founded this Chinese Educational Commission based in Hartford, and which eventually he convinced the Qing Dynasty government send over 120 Chinese young students. They averaged 12 years old back then, more than 100 years ago, 150 years ago. So that really, it's really amazing. Over the period of 4 or 5 years, these young Chinese students stayed in families, stay with American families in Hartford, in different Springfield, in different places. And they not only learn from us, but also they taught American people a lot about China, about Chinese people, and also celebrate the Chinese holidays, like, Lunar New Year's, other holidays. So I think these just remind me about, culture. Of course, we celebrate as a culture, but also we celebrate people, we celebrate history. So I think that's really, we, as a resident of Connecticut, we should take pride of it. And we look forward to really make that as a part of American spirit. Because really, coming from China, we're like other panelists coming from other background, we all agree like what make US special, charming, strong is really the diversity, is really our open heart, open-mindedness. So I think every year, this time, when we celebrate Lunar New Year, it's just like a big reminder for this American spirit. We want to keep it on.
Dr. Chung, I really love that. The notion of what makes us special, charming, and strong. I just love those three descriptions together for not only for the United States, but for Connecticut as well. And my theory is that we become more special, more charming, and stronger the more that we do the type of sharing that you're describing. It's an act of teaching, but it's also a gift. And it's a gift that actually, like seeds, helps grow what may have not been there before. So thank you, Dr. Chung, for sharing that. Sylvia, your reflections.
Oh, my head is swirling from everything. First of all, I can't think of a better place to live than Connecticut. Even though we're, we're dispersed, we don't have a Chinatown. We don't have that history. We're not in San Francisco. And so we actually have to reach out to each other, and we've got different generations. And I'm thinking about this. of immigration, of people from everywhere that come here, and they bring a little story of their Lunar New Year with them. And it's that special place and time. So it's just all very, very different. It reminds me that in 1943, my grandfather was here in the United States. He served in the US Merchant Marine, and he experienced a different type of Lunar New Year than I did, because I was on the other end, because I was excluded by the Chinese Exclusionary Act. You know, in growing up, I couldn't come here at all. And it was a wondrous time for me being a child. I was in Hong Kong. We would go to Queen Elizabeth Park, and it would be just lit up with all these lanterns. And it was just a magical time. And my children don't have that experience. And so Jason talking about being Hawaiian, when I went to college, we realized that we had different experiences being Asian American, and our accumulation of all our experiences become the Chinese or the Asian American experience. It's not just that one thing, but the one thing that we have in common is we're all Americans. And that's something, you know, in 2022, we have to really affirm again and tell people we're Americans, because we're perpetually looked at as these, you know, outsiders. So it's just a very emotional kind of mix of feelings that I have, both joy and sadness and sort of this repetition. And the hope is that we are able to really come together. Like Connecticut is very dispersed, the country is very dispersed. We have Asian Americans all over the country, but come together and make a statement and stand up for ourselves and say, we are American, and this is our background. And, you know, this is that line where we all come out and say that. So, you know, that's that mix of emotions that I have.
Thank you, Sylvia. That's the notion of the threads coming together to expand upon the tapestry of what it means to be an American is just so beautiful, because it is a powerful one, right? And each one of those threads is strong and vital, but together they tell a much bigger story, and a powerful story, as you intimate, which is the story of this ever evolving space that we call this country that is ours. And that's really beautiful. And, you know, the sadness that you describe of having to reaffirm with our voices, right? As you said, with the voice of saying, but we are American too. You know, it's the sadness of that exclusion that you describe, but also the melancholy of having to reaffirm in and of itself. Is really powerful. So there's something that happens when you simmer in that, and we've been simmering in it now for so long. And it seems to me that the immigrant experience for so many different people coming from different places is that experience of finding voice and then affirming that part, that inclusion, that belonging. For me, it's a powerful part of being an American, and I really appreciate you bringing that into the room, because, you know, that sense of voice that affirms self is just such a powerful ingredient to the chorus that is our country. So thank you for that, Sylvia. Representative Fiorello, you know, I want to welcome you, and I would love to hear your reflections as a member of community, as a leader. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. I'd love to share with folks what I've learned about Koreans in Connecticut. For example, the Korean American Society of Connecticut. I didn't know it's the oldest one in continental America, founded in 1957 by a bunch of Yale students who were, you know, Koreans who had arrived at Yale University and wanted to build a community together. The oldest one is in Hawaii. But so I've really gotten to know the Korean American Society here. And then I want to share something else too, which is, here we go. The country's oldest Korean American cultural organization is founded in Connecticut. And this is also about 60 years old. And it's a Yale professor who founded this. She's like a living hero among Korean academic intellectuals. Her name is Dr. Hee-sung Ko, and I have a book here, kind of an autobiography on her. Apologies about my dogs. And then one other thing I wanted to share was, this is me and my friends in Greenwich. And we're all moms who met through our children being in kindergarten. There are 7 of us. We represent, Koreans, Chinese, Hong Kongese, Vietnamese, and then among the Chinese, you have those who are from Shanghai and those from Beijing. And since we met with our children, between the 7 of us, we have 17 kids. And our boys and girls, range from we're hockey moms to soccer moms to tennis moms, ballet moms. And our lives just go in so many different directions. But it's incredible the friendship that we have evolved, and we're so different. But every year, these 7 ladies and their children and their husbands, we get together on Lunar New Year. And we make dumplings together. We always we talk about how each of us in our own childhood had this experience of all our moms and grandmas and aunties gathered around and the children running around. And just naturally, we have recreated this among complete strangers, but we share this, this memory of what it was with us. And it was so rich and so endearing that without anyone saying, like, let's do this organically, we've recreated it for our own children in Greenwich. And it's just a testament to how wonderful it is to be, bicultural, to have this rich history of what America stands for. I mean, to be American, and you look across the news today and you can see like people fighting for their freedoms, and to be in a country that is founded to honor individual rights. Like, what an incredible legacy to be American. And yet we're so blessed to have this other second legacy to reach into. I mean, for me, it's like land of the free, home of the brave. And then also like the land of the morning calm, the hermit kingdom, the richness of Korean architecture. We Koreans are famous for an architecture called Hanok, where you build a courtyard and multi-generations live together in this courtyard. This architecture is, very well preserved in Korea now. And a lot of it was damaged because of the Japanese occupation of Korea for 40 years. But I love Lunar New Year these days. I find it so funny that I've been able to naturally celebrate it with my children and my group of girlfriends here. But that's what I wanted to share with everyone.
Representative, that's so beautiful. That notion of the ever improving, ever evolving America is the gift that we receive, and our cultures that we bring to this America is the gift that we give back. And I just love that the connection between the two gifts, because it is really, there's that strengthening that happens between the two, that coming together that you describe with you and your friends, forever repeated in this culture that we share. So thank you so much for that, Representative Fiorello. That's such a beautiful story. Melinda, your reflections.
So for my family, Lunar New Year is a really special time, especially since both my parents are from China, and since both of them were from vastly different regions. My mom is from the north, where it's Xi'an in Shanxi province, and then my dad is from Jiangsu. So like they came from vastly different areas, and they kind of like met in college, and then they moved to the US. And for them, it's since they're from different provinces, they have different traditions, they eat different foods. Chinese New Year is kind of a time for me and my parents to kind of like celebrate what their homes were, because nowadays, since both my grandparents have passed away and my family members live in China, my Lunar New Year experience is really for my parents to kind of like teach my brother and I more about our Chinese culture. And during the Lunar New Year, I think it's really fun. We eat like hot pot, we have like all the food. And one of the things that I really enjoy is we go through this like week-long marathon of every Chinese TV station. They have a Chinese New Year gala, and we watch every single one of them from the start to the finish, and they're all like 2 hours long. But for me, watching Chinese shows and eating Chinese food is really about me connecting back with my parents' culture, because as an Asian American and as someone who hasn't lived in China like my parents, I sometimes feel like I'm never American enough or I'm never Chinese enough. And really having that opportunity to learn about Chinese culture and connect with Chinese culture and who my parents were in the past is something that I really value. And especially when I was younger, I would always ask my mom during bedtime, like, tell me a story. But my parents would always tell us like Chinese folk stories, because those were really the only stories they knew. And that really became the basis of my Chinese cultural knowledge about those stories that they told to me at bedtime about all these Chinese dynasties, all the culture and all the art that makes up like the Chinese, what makes up Chinese New Year and what makes up all these Chinese holidays. And even on Lunar New Year or on different holidays, for example, Yuan Jie, which is the last day of Lunar New Year, we make sure to have like do the little things and like eat the Chinese foods that you usually eat. So having these experiences has really helped me and connect with my parents' culture and help me learn more about my Chinese identity while still living and being an American. So
Thank you, Melinda. You know, there's something really powerful about the stories that family gives to you, because there is a curiosity that is struck from those stories that you can never shake for your entire lifetime. And it's the curiosity of knowing more about yourself, knowing more about your family, and it's that those memories are really like seedlings, and that really resonated with me because of the power, the enduring power of the curiosity that's stroked by the story of memory, so of family. Thank you so much, Melinda. Megan, I would love to hear your reflections.
Yeah, I think, a lot of what everyone has said really resonates with me. My mother is Filipino, so I'm half Filipina. And I think it's really beautiful how this celebration and this holiday has really evolved for me. When I was little, I remember a lot of emphasis around the holiday being placed on noise making. A lot of it was about setting off fireworks or firecrackers or making noise to ward off bad spirits and bad luck. So in the Filipino culture, we use horns or cooking pots, and there was just something so releasing about banging on a pot. And for me, that's evolved, especially in this space, in this capacity, working here with this charge and the Connecticut AAPI residents. It's really about vocalization and making noise and being heard in a way that's not just to warn off bad spirits, but in a way of expressing your presence in a way that I think is very emboldening and very powerful. And that has really stuck with me as I've grown older and begun to really make headway in this work.
Thank you, Megan. That's really beautiful. That idea of making yourself known, that expression of presence. Mike, to put you on the spot again, one thing that I love about the way in which you conduct your work, in some ways life's work, which is that connection between culture, history, the arts, and to Megan's point, for the purpose of being seen and for the purpose of seeing each other. I would love for you to reflect on that notion, Mike, and how that inspires you.
Hearing Representative Kimberly Fiorello speak earlier, about this pod of friends that she has, and they do this Lunar New Year's. Our Lunar New Year celebration before pandemic used to be my family, my cousins, all our kids, and we started inviting new families into it. And these were like non-Asian American families, and they would come over and they would eat with us and they would enjoy themselves, and they became a part of the family. They're there for weddings, for births. So I feel like this Lunar New Year's connects us to this larger narrative of who we see as community and our neighbors and what that means. And when I'm thinking about visibility, right, this is something small, but I read this book called Friends Will Be Friends to my child's class. My child's a kindergarten, and Friends Are Friends Forever is the title of the book. And it was a wonderful experience because my son was able to see himself reflected in there through the rice cooker, through the noodles, through the foods that we enjoy. And then you had other students come in and share. Like there was this young child who had a Polish grandma. So she was like, my babcia and I make pierogies, and to see that. And my best friend is half Polish and half Iranian. So one day, like recently, I went over his house and made like 100 pierogies while our kids played. It was the first time I've ever rolled anything. I cook all the time, but I don't help my wife with the egg rolls because I don't roll it nicely. But my best friend was struggling so bad that I was like, dude, just take a seat back and I'll do this, So I feel like this idea of connection and where we are, I think Asian Americans, we have this multiplicity to us. We don't fit in a binary. We are not like, oftentimes we are seen as one monolithic block, but we each come to this with our own life experiences, our own way of not just what we value, but what we see as important, And sometimes when we have this space, you say like, this is what I'm important. I remember, I think the best way to explain this is, I remember during Lunar New Year's in school, I am a darker shade of brown. So when we think of Lunar New Year's, we think of Chinese Americans, Vietnamese Americans. And I remember being in a class in like 4th grade, and we were teaching everyone how to use chopsticks. And I was so thrilled to like help and show people how to do this. But I remember not being allowed to because there were like 2 other lighter Asian Americans in that space, And I remember at that time feeling othered, as in like, am I not Asian? Like, what am I being, So I think this is where our stories kind of connect us to this larger narrative, gives us something to anchor into and reclaim this space that we might have felt like we lost, or we might felt like we weren't ever a part of. I hope that answers what you're, yeah.
Thank you, Mike. This leads us to the next part of our conversation together, which is the looking forward. And in so many ways, the stories that we share with each other at some point become the story that we share with others. And how we share those stories, whether we are the authors of those stories, how we interpret those stories for our neighbors' ears, is such it's an intimate but unifying experience in cultures and cross cultures. Very recently, we've been talking in the state of Connecticut about 2 key ways in which those stories might be told. One of them is through language access, being able to very rudimentally communicate with each other. But the other one is through the storytelling that happens in education, how we learn about each other, how we learn about the depth and richness of culture in Connecticut, some of which you shared today, starting with you, Jason, but also those other quiet stories that eventually reveal themselves over time that we reveal to each other. So I'm wondering if you would have some reflections on that, on language access, on the storytelling that can happen in places like schools and other places where we gather, sometimes informal, sometimes more formally, and how it is that we can, as communities, inform those stories. Maybe starting with you, Jason.
Wow, I just want to, thank everyone for sharing these stories and putting this this wonderful tapestry of tales and remembrances. Yeah, I think these 2 facets of our community and seeing our path forward is, on the one hand, we really need attention to the different composition of Asian Americans across our state. You know, Hartford looks really different than Windham County, but you know, those are, you know, there are Asian American communities in both of those spaces. And when we think about, you know, how can we, you know, structure programs or structure, you know, the state's resources in ways that can serve an unevenly distributed population that has equal needs. You know, this requires, you know, a lot of creativity, but then it also, we have, you know, there's a necessity for communities to speak up and say, I'm here. And so, you know, part of the cultural visibility, right, of a celebration like this should always kind of help us to point back to the needs of those communities. Because there's, I think, you know, one way that we can celebrate and appreciate, but then another holiday happens, or, you know, the calendar moves on. And these are important moments to kind of think back and say, okay, how are we, you know, how is this community doing? And, you know, one way that story, that reflection, that you know, continuous presence can be a part of everyday conversations through curriculum and through schools. And so when we see, you know, as I've seen in the last year, that there's just so much more attention to Lunar New Year, this is a great introduction, right, to these kinds of cultural practices that give this kind of, you know, very public platform for, you know, for us to, not only for Connecticut people to learn about their neighbors, but for people to feel like their whole self is present in these spaces. You know, really generates different conditions for us to have that bigger public conversation. So when issues of, say, language access come up, it's not a surprise. Oh, I didn't know people in Connecticut needed that help, right? But that it's a part of how we understand the, you know, the evolving, you know, social landscape, and how do we do, you know, work our public policies in ways that lift everyone up.
Thank you, Jason. You know, opportunities is such a careful mix between resource and relationship. And what you're describing is how resource and relationship work together and meet people where they are, so that opportunity blossoms from that interaction. So thank you for that, Jason. You know, we've seen there's another unfolding that is the beautiful story of America, which is that constant, the emergence and the reemergence of peoples as they arrive and as they flourish. So thank you for sharing that, Jason. I think that's spot on. Sylvia, your reflections.
It's interesting because as an Asian American, and I look at all of this from the perspective of being Asian American. So today, a friend of mine who's Korean American and I drove around the Hartford area to go to a Korean restaurant, which was closed today. So we looked down the list and we had Japanese, we had Chinese, we had all these different things. And being Asian American, it's just open to, oh, I'm not just Chinese. You know, we looked at all these different, oh, do you want ramen? And unfortunately, we had to have breakfast because everything was closed because it's on a Monday. But that's just an experience. She reached out to me. I reached back out to her because we have a commonality, even though it's unspecified, right? But what we have in common is we're Asian Americans, and we have to advocate for each other. I think that's something that I've learned, not only for language access, because they're all people who are settling here from Asia, and actually in Africa, all over the world, that have a commonality of experiences. They can't communicate. And because they can't communicate, they can't have access to our government. They can't properly learn what it means to exercise these rights of liberty that we have here. And it is up to all of us, including Asian Americans. So I was standing in front of a bus stop once with these Chinese scholars, and I saw my brother walking down in Harvard Square, which is where it was. And I called to my brother, and they started laughing at me. And I said, "Why are you laughing at me? These are Chinese scholars." They said, "You Americans get so excited over the smallest things." Aha, that's where I knew the difference, right? I didn't know the difference being in this country, but I knew the difference looking at their perspective of me. And because we are loud and we grew up to be loud, we need to continue to be loud because they're not going to be loud. They need to have language access. We know to exercise our rights because we grew up here. We have an understanding. And that's what I take away from this. You know, I had to take a class in college in Chinese culture to understand what my grandmother was doing. I took an entire year of Chinese anthropology to understand all the different things, spirits and whatever. And I likened it to, you know, the Irish, because the Irish live with spirits too. And that's, you know, intellectually how I could grasp that. But, you know, ultimately, I am an American and I need to advocate for them and others. So that's what I take from it.
Sylvia, I really appreciate that memory. You know, I recall in the Latino experience how generationally the differences between generations, the generation that has just arrived, the generation who are their children, and then the generation who may be their grandchildren and beyond, and the various roles that we play cross-generationally. You know, me interpreting for my mother when she didn't understand, and in a lot of ways, you know, her interpreting to me when I was trying to understand my grandmother and her perspective, which through the unfiltered and uninformed eyes of a third generation American might seem very strange and inaccessible, but that interpretation is really what unifies us across time, really, and across culture. And so I just appreciate you evoking that, and I think it'll resonate for so many that are watching. Dr. Chung, I would love your reflections.
Thank you. This time I remembered to unmute myself. First of all, I just want to echo back what Sylvia just mentioned. I feel like I can't agree more about what she said. We have to advocate for each other, you know, because we're given the opportunity to speak up, right? And also like fortunately we're bilingual, bicultural, but there are a lot of people they couldn't speak, as Mike previously mentioned about. His grandma spoke 5 languages, but not English. You know, she's so talented linguistically, but you know, just the language is not her thing. English is not her thing. So I think language access definitely will be really necessary for people who in need of that kind of service. But also, I want to just put in a different layer. You know, it's not like we take language as a way, or like a curriculum as a way, like just to help people who use it, but also help people who offer it. Like, for example, you know, we teach people, we teach a Cambodian Chinese, I mean English, but then the Cambodian can also teach us their language, right? Because that's the beauty about America. That's, you know, we have, as a country, we attract so many talents, and we really can draw from those talents and enrich us. So I think we can take it as way as, you know, we're enriched by those immigrants, by those people who are coming to this country. And similarly as a curriculum, you know, teaching culture, teaching history, teaching like Chinese Exclusion Act, all these really help enrich American, you know, whether you're homegrown, whether you're refugee, or whether you're immigrants. So that's always my on my attitude. You know, I never feel like, okay, I come to this country, I'm taking advantage, you know, the service, you know, welfare, you know, those are common stereotype they said to the first generation immigrants. But I really go beyond that. I'm like, okay, I'm coming here. I just want to open up your mind. I want to enrich your experience, because it's really, that's true. You know, just from what Jason, what everybody shared, it's really like a really powerful lesson, powerful experience. You can never ask, you can never buy, you can never like get it from elsewhere. So I think that's the strengths I referred to earlier. And I think we should definitely take advantage of all the talents, all the resilience, all the open-mindedness we have here within our community.
I love that, Dr. Chung. You know, you remind me of the fact that I have 4 nephews. 2 of them are in a school in Dallas where they are learning English, Spanish, and Mandarin Chinese. And it was so, I remember the first time my nephews came home and shared with us a song that they had learned in school in Mandarin Chinese, and the power of that moment, I was just blown away. And to them, it was so natural and beautiful. They just wanted to share something that they had experienced that day. It's that gift that you're describing, the gift that communities that are emerging here or establishing here and joining the fabric are also giving back, right? It's not just about inheriting English, but it's about sharing the culture that you're bringing with you, including the linguistic culture. I really love that. I think it's something that does make us a unique place in that we can resonate in so many different languages together. So thank you for sharing that, Dr. Chung. That was really beautiful. Melinda, you spoke to the power of your position as a student to teach, to learn, and to encourage the environment of teaching and learning. So tell us more about that, Melinda.
So I think for me, education has been like a really big part in helping me connect back with my Chinese culture. As I said before, my parents have shown me all these different Chinese shows, have told me all these stories about their history and how they've grown up and all these stories that they've learned as a child. And I kind of want, and I think my experience is something that everybody should have the opportunity to get, because I think stories is really where people start to learn. It's really where people start to consider what you think and why you think a certain way. And I think it's really important for students to do that through, especially through history classes, because history is essentially just one giant story of us, of all these events and all these things that people have done. And in my school, I started something called, we started a club called Amity Asian Activism, and we reached out to Dr. Chung and also JHD earlier. And for me, it was a really eye-opening experience, because we met with these people who like devoted their lives, they devoted their whole careers to advocating for Asian American students and making sure that even though they have never gotten the experience of having this mandated education or formal education specifically about Asian Americans in this country, students like me or future students have the opportunity to possibly learn about Asian American culture within their social studies classes. And they're not just learning bits and pieces about just one paragraph in their textbook about the Chinese Exclusion Act, but they're having a lengthy and very in-depth kind of understanding and class about what it means to be an Asian American and how these people have gone through all these experiences and what they've done for this country. So I think within my own school, my friend and I, we reached out to our social studies department head, and since our school is starting their diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging audit for our school, we've invited Dr. Chung to speak with our principal in how we can include things like Asian American history or include the history of other people of other ethnicities into our school curriculum, so that students have the opportunity to learn about other people and their perspectives.
Thank you, Melinda. Thank you so much. I love that idea of the not only the importance of storytelling, but the importance of engaging in the process of the story being told, and that's of your story being told. And that's it's such a critical element. You know, as I said, there are the various conversations that happen in these spaces, right? The stories that are told about us, the stories that we tell about ourselves, and then of course, those quiet stories that we share with each other, about each other. And what's so powerful is the constant evolution and interplay between the three in the writing of history and in the recognition of people. So thank you so much, Melinda, for sharing that. Representative Fiorello, your reflections.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to listen to everybody's comments. I guess I wanted to add, let me share my screen one more time. I want to show you guys this picture of the East Rock Institute. The logo is this 3-part yin and yang, which usually you see a 2-part yin and yang, but a 3-part is often used as well. And I remember Dr. Ko explaining to me that, you know, this is what Asians, or perhaps she meant Koreans in general specifically, but maybe Asians in general, can bring to, you know, the conversation in America today. And that is, it's not just this way or that way, but there's a third way. And there could be something in, I don't know, the character of Asians. You know, we're all so unique. We're all uniquely different. Maybe there's something that we bring to the table to the popular ideas and spirit of our times right now that introduces a third way, which, God willing, is more peaceful and less angry. But I worry about, you know, e pluribus pluribus. Like, I greatly appreciate the motto of our country, which is e pluribus unum, which is to say that you recognize the whole fabric, the uniqueness of each person that makes up the fabric of our country. But it's all underpinned by an enlightened idea that we are all alike, whether we're all American or we're, you know, all born with equal rights. And what I worry is, as we put so much focus on a real desire to understand all these different cultures, we sort of go back to a natural human instinct, actually, which is very tribal. It's very easy, and throughout history, it shows you, like, you know, I'm Catholic and I'm gonna have to kill you because you're not Catholic, or, you know, I'm from this part of the village and you're not from that part of the village. And those are kind of very base, and I don't want to see our culture, our society going back to that. And I sometimes feel that you risk that, especially if you're seeking to use the power of government. Because, you know, I entered government, I ran for office because I desperately wanted to be a voice in government to say, please stop using government for everything. You don't have to. You know, there's a proper role for government, and the proper role is to ensure peace, a kind of society where we can all thrive. And that's really protect private property rights and protect individual rights. But beyond that, everything else should be done in the private sector, in like the marketplace of ideas. And I love the idea of wanting society to be much more aware of Asian stories. We have amazing stories of tragedy to triumph. I mean, I think about my dad, who immigrated from Korea at a time when there were so few Koreans in Virginia. And he tells me about when he was on the football team, and he was, you know, the small Asian guy. And if you go to his high school in Virginia, there's still a glass case where there's a very old black and white photo, and there's a little Asian guy there on the football team. My dad's like, that's me. And then many years later, when I went back, he had his family, I was born in Seoul, and we came back, you know, one of my thoughts was, I want to be a cheerleader. It just seems so prototypically American. But what I mean to say is that there's a lot of, you know, I want to stop Asian hate too. And I want to be a part of the solution of sharing the beauty of all of our different cultures of being Asian American, just like my group of girlfriends. We're not all Korean, but I don't want to use so much the power of government to do it, because once government takes over a project, it becomes very static, or it's hard to change it, and it sort of gets taken over. And particularly ideas, when government takes an idea, it very quickly flips to propaganda. And I would much prefer that we all, like, let's all write books or create cartoons, or use the power of modern technology to really let beautiful Asian stories go viral. But please don't keep seeking the power of government to do it, to mandate it, to force it, to put government dollars towards it. It's not necessary to propagate beautiful ideas to use government, is a perspective that I have.
There's that ancient, or that at least ancient to our collective experience in this experiment that's called the United States, that tension between e pluribus and unum that you described, I think, so beautifully, which is the invitation, that original invitation for all of us to come together under these skies and hold on to what we bring, but find together what we create. And I think that your call to really understand the power of the music that the orchestra creates without losing the beauty of the violin is really powerful. And then also understanding that there's a specific type of uniquely American music called jazz that exists because it is free, because it is unbridled by pretension, and it just is a sharing among all of us. And I think that's what you're evoking in me, which is that power of that unbridled freedom that you're describing, which is so beautiful. And so I want to appreciate you, and I want to appreciate all of you for sharing these beautifully intimate stories, not only in celebration of culture, but also in that unifying sense of what brings us all together to build the opportunities that are so wonderfully available to us through our work relationally and through our support as people. So again, I want to thank you for your sharing. It was, oftentimes when we have these types of conversations, we stick to the facts and think about how things work. But it is these moments where we can share these quiet stories that we tell each other about ourselves with a greater audience, that I think we find the most resonance, the most learning, and the most possibility to being an even better place than we left it. So I want to thank each and every one of you. And I just really look forward to continuing to hear your stories and working with you in this beautiful state to make it an even better one. Have a wonderful day.
Thank
you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank